Hello everyone, my name is Charlie Pierce, and in partnership with Glendale Heritage Preservation, I'm excited to present to you what will be the beginning of a series of important historical discoveries we have made in and around the village of Glendale. I grew up in Glendale and lived most of my life here. My family also has been in Glendale for 4 generations. Through my experience here with family and friends, I've come to realize I've accumulated a bit of lifelong, firsthand experiences of Glendale and the surrounding areas. These experiences have been through my eyes and my years of my devotion to historic research. My years are 1790 to 1860. Now it's time for me to share some of my findings with you. Today's subject is about some of the life of a man named John Van Zandt. He was an American abolitionist with historic importance. In the early 1800s, he moved from northern Kentucky to land he had purchased near what would be known as present-day Glendale. The property lies on a bluff overlooking the Mill Creek. It's between where St. Rita's and Landmark Baptist churches are today. John Van Zandt was born on September 23rd in 1791 in Fleming County, Kentucky, which is about 20 miles south of the Ohio River. He was the son of Alicia and Margaret, and his father was an Revolutionary War veteran. In 1814, he married his first wife, Nancy Northcott, in Kentucky. There, they had 7 children. After moving to Hamilton County, she passed away, and about a year later, John married Nancy Mercy Bowen, his second wife, and they had 4 children. While living in Kentucky, he and his family were slave owners. Over time, he developed strong views against the institution of slavery, and through his church, friends, and readings, he decided to move his family and slaves across the Ohio River to the free state of Ohio, then immediately granted his slaves their freedom. After much searching, he decided to stay in Ohio, and finding and purchasing land overlooking the Miami and Erie Canal in the Mill Creek Valley, just north of Cincinnati between Sycamore and Springfield Townships. He named the estate Mount Pierpoint after an abolitionist from Massachusetts whose poetry about abolitionism he enjoyed. Shortly after arriving in Ohio, he became one of the first trustees of the new Methodist Episcopal Church in present-day Evendale. At the same time, he began building his farm and his home. The farmhouse was built from old bricks from a church he attended in Philadelphia. He also started becoming an active abolitionist and soon was known as a conductor of the Underground Railroad. He started to be known to harbor runaway slaves in his farmhouse and aid their movement to the north. During many of his trips to the city to deliver produce and pick up supplies, he would stop near the Lane Seminary in Walnut Hills. There he would frequently find and load into his wagon runaways from the South. Slowly, he became known for aiding these fugitives to reach their next station in the Underground Railroad. With the bounty payments for runaways reaching near highs, he became a big target. His church found out and immediately took action against him and banished him from the church. The church voted 16-7 in favor of expulsion for breaking the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. Many of the citizens of Sharon did not support his abolitionism. Van Zandt continued to operate as a conductor, even though he suffered repercussions from his neighbors because of his involvement. One slave that received his help was Eliza Harris, whose escape was documented in Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel that was authored by Harry Beecher Stowe. Stowe was also a resident of Cincinnati and Walnut Hills at the Lane Seminary. She used Van Zandt as a model for another character in her story, John Van Trump. His house at Mount Pierpoint became known as the Eliza House. One day, on his trips returning north to his farm while transferring a group of runaways, picked up earlier in the morning on April 23rd of 1842, his wagon and horses were heard passing through on Lebanon Road, traveling through what is today Sharon, by local residents. They knew it was Van Zandt and decided to follow him. And just before he arrived to his destination, just south of present-day Lebanon, Ohio, near the Bates farm, the bounty stopped his wagon. He had 8 runaway slaves inside his wagon. One of the bounty hunters rode his horse in front of his team of horses and stalked and blocked Van Zandt's travel. Van Zandt quickly ordered Andrew, who he had driving the wagon, to run them over. Andrew didn't run him over. Instead, he jumped from the wagon and ran. Van Zandt and all the other runaways were captured. Van Zandt was immediately arrested by the sheriff and taken to jail. He was eventually tried and convicted of violating the Fugitive Slave Act and sentenced to prison. He was fined $500 and ordered to pay an additional $1,200 for Andrew getting away. This payment was to be made to the slave owner, Wharton Jones. Van Zandt did not pay his fines, and it went to trial. After the trial, Van Zandt's lawyers, Salmon P. and Thomas Morris, appealed the court's decision, and a legal battle went on for 5 years. The case eventually landed in the U.S. Supreme Court. The arguments for the defense were that the federal act required proof the accused knew they were assisting escaped slaves from a slave state in a free state. The legal team was joined by William Seward, and together with Chase, the case continued into 1847. Van Zandt still would not pay his fines, so he remained in prison. Van Zandt became ill and died. After his death, the trial finally concluded. The court ruled against him 9-0. The slaves were immediately returned to Kentucky to the owner's family, and by the time of John Van Zandt's death, Wharton Jones had also died. After Van Zandt's death, the Court of Common Pleas assigned Edmund R. Glenn and Robert Crawford to be the estate's administrators. Both these men were significantly involved in the formation and creation of the village of Glendale. 4 years later, in 1851, after extreme compromising between them and the courts, Edmund Glenn agreed to pay Van Zandt's debts, which he did in January of 1851. The farm was then sold, and as a result, the property became part of the involvement of the formation of Glendale. After the sale of his farm, his family members were scattered. They went and they lived with relatives and friends. John was initially buried in the Old Salem churchyard near his home and farm alongside his first wife. Many years later, they were moved in 1888 and moved down to the Wesleyan Cemetery in Cummingsville, and we know it as North Side, down near the Spring Grove Cemetery. A large rectangular upright stone tablet was placed on the centennial of his birth, which was 1891. The grave is very plain. Although the epitaph is quite lengthy, the statement reads, "In him Christianity had a living witness. He saw God as his Father and received every man as his brother. The cause of the poor, the widow, the orphan, the oppressed was his cause. He fed, clothed, and sheltered and guarded them. He was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. In 2005, a historic marker was erected near his home by the Ohio Historical Society, stating it was one of the most active stations on the Underground Railroad in Ohio.